Chapter 1. The collision. The morning rain pounds against the windows of Café Pushkin as Elena Volkov rushes between tables, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor, dark circles beneath her green eyes betraying another sleepless night spent working her third job after tucking 6-year-old Mila into bed with promises that Mama would buy her new school shoes soon, very soon. If only Elena could stretch the rubles far enough to cover rent and groceries and the mounting stack of bills that seem to multiply like shadows in their tiny apartment. Her hands tremble slightly from exhaustion as she balances the silver tray laden with steaming cups of coffee, each one representing precious kopecks that might mean the difference between Mila having a warm breakfast or going to school hungry again. And Elena's heart clenches with the familiar weight of desperation that has become her constant companion since her husband's death 3 years ago left her drowning in debt and responsibility. The cafe door chimes with an ominous finality as Dmitry Kozlov enters, 6 feet of lethal elegance, wrapped in a suit that costs more than Elena earns in 6 months, his cold black hair perfectly styled despite the Moscow storm raging outside, and his steel-gray eyes scan the room with the predatory assessment of a man who owns half the city and crushes the other half beneath his handmade Italian leather shoes. Elena doesn't recognize him immediately, too focused on delivering the morning orders without dropping anything, but the other customers instinctively shrink back from his presence, sensing the dangerous power that radiates from him like heat from a forge, and even the chattering socialites fall silent as he moves with fluid grace toward the corner table reserved for only the most exclusive patrons. Time seems to slow as Elena pivots away from table 12, her tray held high, her mind already calculating how many more hours she needs to work tonight at the hotel cleaning job to afford Mila's medicine, when her exhausted body betrays her, and she stumbles slightly on the uneven floor tile that management has ignored for months despite her repeated warnings. The scalding coffee arcs through the air in horrifying slow motion, a cascade of dark liquid that lands with devastating precision across the pristine white silk of Dmitry's shirt and the charcoal wool of his jacket, staining the fabric that probably costs more than Elena's monthly salary, and the cafe falls into a silence so complete that even the rain seems to pause in anticipation of the explosion that must surely follow. Elena's heart stops beating entirely as she stares at the spreading stain, her mind racing through apologies and explanations and desperate calculations of how she could possibly pay for the damage. But when she finally finds the courage to look up into Dmitry Kozlov's face, she doesn't find the rage she expected. Instead, she discovers something far more unsettling in those storm-gray eyes. A flicker of surprise that quickly transforms into something that looks almost like fascination as he studies her flushed cheeks and the way her chin lifts in automatic defiance even as her hands shake with terror. "I'm not apologizing for needing to work," she says, the words tumbling out before she can stop them, her Russian accent thick with emotion and exhaustion, and something in her fierce green gaze seems to ignite a fire in Dmitry's chest that he hasn't felt in years of boardroom conquests and hollow victories, because here stands a woman who doesn't cower before him, doesn't simper or calculate her words for maximum advantage, but simply stares at him with the raw honesty of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The cafe manager rushes over with profuse apologies and threats to fire Elena immediately, but Dmitry raises one elegant hand to silence him, his eyes never leaving Elena's face as he slowly removes his ruined jacket and sets it aside with deliberate care, studying the way her breath catches when his fingers brush against hers as she instinctively reaches to help. And the electric shock that passes between them at that innocent contact seems to rewrite something fundamental in both their souls. "What's your name?" he asks, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to having his questions answered immediately. But there's something else there too, a gentleness that surprises even him as he watches the play of emotions across her expressive features: fear, pride, defiance, and beneath it all, a vulnerability that makes his chest tighten with an unfamiliar protectiveness. "Elena," she whispers, and her name on her own lips sounds like a prayer and a challenge all at once. And Dmitry finds himself wanting to hear her say it again, wanting to discover what other sounds he could coax from that soft mouth, if he could strip away the layers of exhaustion and desperation that shroud her like armor. The manager's shrill voice cuts through the moment as he berates Elena for her clumsiness and demands that she clean up the mess before collecting her final paycheck, and something dark and dangerous flickers across Dmitry's features as he realizes that this woman, this fierce, beautiful creature who has somehow managed to penetrate his carefully constructed emotional walls with a single act of clumsiness, is about to lose the job she so desperately needs because of him. You're firing her. Dmitri's voice drops to a silky whisper that makes the manager visibly pale, because everyone in Moscow knows that tone means someone is about to discover why Dmitri Kozlov is both feared and revered in equal measure, and Elena watches in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the city seems to be considering violence on her behalf, which is both terrifying and inexplicably thrilling. Hours later, after Dmitri has bought the cafe outright just to ensure Elena keeps her job, a gesture that costs him less than he spends on wine in a month but means everything to her, he finds himself unable to stop thinking about the way she looked at him, not with the calculating interest he's accustomed to from women, but with genuine confusion and a wariness that suggests she sees right through his expensive facade to the dangerous man beneath. When he learns from the manager that Elena works 3 jobs and still struggles to support her daughter, something shifts irrevocably in his chest, a crack in the ice that has surrounded his heart since childhood, and he makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. He offers her a position as his personal assistant, claiming it's purely business necessity, while knowing that nothing about his feelings for this woman is purely anything. Elena stares at him across the small cafe table where he's asked her to sit, her green eyes bright with unshed tears of exhaustion and hope and fear, because she knows that accepting his offer means entering a world where she doesn't belong, where her threadbare clothes and calloused hands will mark her as an outsider among Russia's elite. But she also knows that Mila needs new shoes and the rent is due tomorrow, and sometimes survival requires swallowing pride and taking risks that might destroy you. "I don't know why you're doing this," she says finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I need this job more than I need to understand your motives." And when she extends her small, work-roughened hand to shake his, the contact sends lightning through both their bodies, a promise of complications and desires that neither is prepared to acknowledge yet, but which will soon consume them both with the inevitability of a Moscow winter, cold and beautiful and utterly inescapable. Chapter 2. Behind closed doors, the glass walls of Dmitri's corner office on the 52nd floor seem to trap more than just the golden Moscow sunlight. They hold the electric tension that crackles between him and Elena every time she enters with his morning coffee, her presence transforming the sterile corporate space into something alive and dangerous, where every shared glance across mahogany conference tables feels like a secret confession, and every accidental brush of fingers when she hands him documents sends shockwaves through both their carefully guarded hearts. Elena has been working as his personal assistant for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Russia's business elite while trying to ignore the way Dmitri's steel-gray eyes follow her movements with an intensity that makes her skin burn and her breath catch in her throat. 3 weeks of pretending that the way he says her name, Elena, in that deep, whiskey-rough voice doesn't make her pulse race with forbidden longing she has no right to feel. The afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows catches the gold threads in her simple brown hair as she organizes his calendar, completely unaware that Dmitri has stopped reading his contracts entirely, mesmerized by the graceful efficiency of her movements and the way she unconsciously hums a soft Russian lullaby while she works. The same melody he remembers his grandmother singing before his father's empire consumed what remained of his childhood innocence. When the elevator chimes unexpectedly and 6-year-old Mila bursts through the office doors like a ray of sunshine, her school backpack bouncing and her dark curls wild from the Moscow wind, Elena's face transforms with such radiant joy that Dmitri feels something crack open in his chest, a warmth he hasn't experienced since he was barely older than this child who now stares at him with curious brown eyes that hold no fear, no calculation, only the pure honesty of youth. "Mama, is this the nice man who gave you the important job?" Mila asks with the devastating directness of children, and when she walks right up to Dmitri's imposing desk without hesitation, he finds himself kneeling to her eye level with a gentleness that surprises even him, his voice soft and careful as he asks about her day at school, and Elena watches in stunned silence as Moscow's most feared businessman discusses finger painting and story time with genuine interest, his usual mask of cold authority completely dissolved. The sight of Dmitri's large, powerful hands that have signed deals worth billions and destroyed careers with a single signature, carefully examining Mila's crayon drawing of their family, ignites something fierce and protective in Elena's chest because she recognizes the wonder in his expression, the way he studies the stick figure labeled Mama with reverent attention, as if he's never seen anything more precious, and she realizes with terrifying clarity that beneath his ruthless, exterior beats the heart of a man who has been starved of simple human connection. That evening, after Mila has fallen asleep on a leather sofa in Dimitri's outer office and Elena has covered her with Dimitri's own suit jacket, they find themselves alone in the penthouse elevator that connects his office to his private apartment, the silence between them charged with unspoken desires and the weight of everything they're not allowed to feel. And when the elevator lurches slightly between floors, Elena stumbles against Dimitri's chest, her palms pressed against the hard wall of his torso, and for one breathless moment they stand frozen, her green eyes locked with his gray ones, both feeling the thunderous beating of his heart beneath her touch. "I should go," Elena whispers, but she doesn't move away, can't move away, because something in his gaze holds her captive, something vulnerable and hungry that makes her forget all the reasons why wanting him is dangerous. And when his hand rises to cup her cheek with devastating tenderness, she leans into the touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. The elevator doors open into Dimitri's private penthouse, revealing a space that takes Elena's breath away, not because of its obvious luxury, though the imported marble and crystal chandeliers speak of wealth beyond imagination, but because every wall is lined floor to ceiling with books, thousands of volumes of Russian classics, philosophy, poetry, and literature that reveal the soul of a man who feeds his mind even as he starves his heart, and Elena realizes that the cold, calculating Billionaire is also a man who finds solace in Pushkin's verses and Tolstoy's wisdom. "You read Akhmatova," she breathes, running her fingers along the spine of a well-worn collection, and something flickers in Dimitri's eyes. Surprise, pleasure, recognition. Because no one has ever noticed his books before, certainly no one has ever understood what they mean to him. These silent companions that have been his only confidants through years of isolation and power games. "Poetry is the only truth in a world built on lies," he says, his voice rough with emotion he struggled to contain. And when Elena turns to face him, her eyes bright with understanding, he finds himself sharing pieces of his soul he's never revealed to anyone. How he memorizes verses during hostile takeovers to remember what beauty feels like, how Pushkin's words about love and loss are the only prayers he's ever found meaningful, how the weight of his empire sometimes threatens to crush what humanity remains in him. Their conversation flows like wine, intimate and intoxicating, as Elena curls into the corner of his leather sofa with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in her hands, reading passages aloud in her melodic voice, while Dmitri watches her with an expression so tender it would shock his business rivals. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, as Moscow glitters below them like scattered diamonds, they both realize they're falling into something deeper and more dangerous than simple attraction. They're falling in love, despite the impossible gulf between their worlds. The spell breaks violently the next morning when Viktor Petrov, Dmitri's most vicious business rival, corners Elena in the parking garage before she can reach the security of the building, his expensive cologne failing to mask the stench of corruption as he leans too close, his breath hot against her ear as he whispers threats wrapped in silk. "Tell your employer that his beautiful assistant will look lovely at the bottom of the Moscow River if he doesn't reconsider the Sakhalin deal," and the casual way he mentions Mila's school schedule, her walking route home, the cafe where she stops for her afternoon treat, sends ice through Elena's veins as she realizes that loving Dmitri, and she does love him, God help her, she loves him with a desperation that terrifies her, has painted a target on both her back and her daughters, and suddenly the glass tower that felt like a sanctuary becomes a prison, trapping her between her growing feelings for a man who inhabits a world where love is just another weapon to be wielded against the weak. Chapter 3. The seduction of power. The crystal chandeliers of the Bolshoi ballroom cast their ethereal glow over Moscow's elite as Elena stands at Dmitri's side, her borrowed emerald gown, a designer creation he'd insisted on purchasing despite her protests, hugging her curves like liquid fire, transforming her from struggling single mother into a vision that commands attention from every corner of the opulent room. Yet she feels like an actress playing a role she was never meant to perform. Hyper-aware of the whispered conversations that follow in their wake, like poison trailing through perfumed air. "Look how she clings to him," hisses Princess Volkonsky behind her jeweled fan, her voice dripping with the entitled venom of old Russian aristocracy. Does she honestly think Dmitri Kozlov would ever truly want someone from the gutter? Or is she simply another pretty distraction until he tires of playing savior? The words sliced through Elena's carefully constructed confidence like shards of ice, but when she feels Dimitri's strong hand settle possessively on the small of her back, his touch burning through the silk fabric with protective warmth, she draws strength from his silent support and lifts her chin with the defiant grace that first captured his attention in that coffee-stained cafe encounter that changed both their destinies. Dimitri's jaw clenches with barely restrained fury as he overhears the cruel whispers, his steel-gray eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity, because these people, these parasites who inherited their wealth rather than building empires with blood and determination, dare to judge the most genuine woman he's ever encountered, and the protective rage that courses through his veins surprises him with its primitive intensity, making him want to burn down their entire glittering world just to shield Elena from their poisonous tongues. The auction begins with the typical pageantry of Moscow's charitable elite, wealthy bidders throwing around millions of rubles like confetti while discussing vacation homes in Monaco and private jets to Dubai, their casual displays of obscene wealth making Elena's stomach turn as she thinks of families like hers who struggle to afford basic necessities. But when the auctioneer announces a fund to provide educational resources for underprivileged children, something fierce and passionate ignites in her chest, overwhelming her fear of these judgmental strangers. Elena's voice cuts through the polite murmur of the crowd like a silver blade as she rises from her seat, her green eyes blazing with conviction that transforms her nervous energy into magnetic power, and every head in the ballroom turns toward her as she speaks with eloquent passion about children who go to school hungry, who dream of university but lack the resources to pursue education, who deserve better than society's indifference to their potential, her words flowing with such raw emotion. An intelligent insight that the room falls into stunned silence. Dimitri watches her with growing amazement and desire, his heart swelling with pride as this remarkable woman, his woman, though neither has dared voice that claim aloud, commands the attention of Russia's most powerful families with nothing but her authentic passion and brilliant mind, proving that true nobility comes from character rather than bloodlines. And he realizes in that crystalline moment that he's not just attracted to her body or charmed by her independence. He's completely, irrevocably in love with her soul. The crowd erupts in thunderous applause as Elena concludes her impromptu speech, pledging her own modest contribution to the fund despite her limited means. And suddenly, the whispered criticisms transform into grudging admiration as Moscow's elite recognize they've witnessed something rare and precious. Genuine compassion backed by intelligence and courage. And Dmitri feels his chest expand with fierce possessive pride as he watches these jaded aristocrats see Elena as he sees her. Extraordinary. Hours later, after countless introductions and conversations where Elena charmed ambassadors and business magnates with her quick wit and warm sincerity, they stand alone on the private terrace of Dimitri's penthouse, the glittering city spread below them like a carpet of fallen stars, the night air cool against their heated skin as Moscow pulses with life 40 floors beneath their feet, and the silence between them thrums with unspoken desires that have been building for weeks like pressure behind a dam about to burst. "You were magnificent tonight," Dmitri whispers, his voice rough with emotion as he stands behind her, so close she can feel the heat radiating from his powerful body, so close that his breath stirs the tendrils of hair at her nape, sending shivers of anticipation down her spine. And when she turns to face him, the raw hunger in his gray eyes steals the breath from her lungs, making her feel both powerful and vulnerable in ways she's never experienced. Elena's heart hammers against her ribs as she looks up at him. This dangerous, beautiful man who has somehow become the center of her universe despite every rational thought warning her away, and she sees her own desperate longing reflected in his gaze, the same need that keeps her awake at night imagining what it would feel like to surrender completely to the desire that burns between them like Moscow's eternal flame. "I don't belong in your world," she breathes, but even as the words leave her lips, she's stepping closer, drawn by the magnetic pull that has connected them since that first collision in the cafe, and when Dimitri's hands frame her face with reverent tenderness, his thumbs tracing the delicate line of her cheekbones, she knows she's about to cross a threshold from which there will be no return. "You don't belong in my world," he agrees, his voice thick with want and wonder. "You belong in a better world, a world I want to build around you." And then his mouth claims hers with desperate hunger, years of emotional isolation pouring into the kiss as he tastes her sweetness and feels her melt against him with matching passion. her small hands fisting in the expensive fabric of his tuxedo, as if anchoring herself to him, while the foundations of both their carefully controlled lives crumble beneath the force of their connection. The kiss deepens with primal intensity as Elena surrenders to the desire she's been fighting since the moment she first looked into his eyes, her lips parting beneath his as he explores her mouth with thorough possession. And she knows with terrifying certainty that she's falling into an abyss from which she'll never escape, that loving Dmitry Kozlov. And she does love him. God help her, loves him with every fiber of her being. Will either be her salvation or her destruction, but as his arms tighten around her and Moscow's lights blur into stars around them, she finds she no longer cares which fate awaits her, because this moment, this kiss, this man, is worth any price she might have to pay. Chapter 4. Hearts on fire. The weeks following their first kiss transform into a dangerous dance of stolen moments and secret desires, as Elena finds herself living a double life that both thrills and terrifies her, professional assistant by day, passionate lover by night. Sneaking through the private elevator to Dmitry's penthouse after business hours while Mila sleeps peacefully in the luxurious guest room, he's prepared with hand-painted murals and toys that cost more than Elena's former monthly salary, creating a fairy tale sanctuary for a little girl who deserves every magical moment after years of struggle and sacrifice. Their affair burns with the intensity of Moscow's white nights, all-consuming and impossible to hide from themselves even as they desperately maintain professional facades during daylight hours, though the charge glances across conference tables and the electric brush of fingers when she hands him documents betray the fire that ignites between them every time they're alone, turning his sterile office into a battleground where desire wars with propriety and always wins. Elena's body has memorized every detail of Dmitry's penthouse, the way moonlight streams across his king-sized bed where he worships her with reverent hands and desperate kisses, the marble bathroom where he traces soap across her skin with the devotion of a man discovering paradise, the leather sofa in his study where she falls asleep reading Tolstoy aloud while he watches her with an expression of such tender amazement that it breaks her heart with its vulnerability, because beneath the ruthless billionaire facade lives a man starving for the simple intimacy she offers without calculation or agenda. The guilt eats at Elena's conscience like acid when Dmitry presents Mila with a closet full of designer clothes that transform her daughter from a charity case into a little princess, when he arranges for private tutors and music lessons and ballet classes that Elena could never afford, when he casually mentions paying off her mounting debts as if clearing away the financial anxiety that has haunted her for years is nothing more than a minor inconvenience, and she finds herself torn between crushing gratitude and wounded pride, because accepting his generosity feels like losing pieces of herself, like becoming a kept woman rather than an independent mother fighting for her child's future. "I can't let you pay for everything," she whispers against his chest in the aftermath of their lovemaking, her voice thick with conflicted emotions as his fingers trace lazy patterns along her bare spine, and when he pulls back to look at her with those storm-gray eyes that see straight through to her soul, she sees not pity or condescension but understanding laced with pain, because he recognizes her fierce need for autonomy even as his desperate desire to protect and provide wars with, respecting her independence. Dmitry's own internal struggle plays out in the tender way he handles both Elena and Mila, his powerful hands that have crushed business rivals and signed death warrants disguised as contracts, becoming impossibly gentle when he braids Mila's dark curls or helps her with homework, his voice losing its commanding edge when he reads bedtime stories with theatrical flourishes that make the little girl giggle with delight. And Elena watches these moments with her heart breaking open, because she sees how desperately he craves the family connection he's never had, how her daughter's innocent trust is healing wounds in his soul he didn't even know existed. The moment that changes everything arrives on a quiet Sunday morning when Mila, sitting between them at the breakfast table in Dmitry's kitchen while sunlight streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, looks up from her pancakes with the devastating directness of childhood and asks, "Dmitry, are you going to be my new papa?" And the question hangs in the air like a live wire, crackling with implications that neither adult is prepared to face, though the way Dmitry's face goes pale and Elena's breath catches in her throat reveals how much they both want the answer to be yes. Elena's heart hammers against her ribs as she watches Dmitri struggle with emotions too big for words, his usually controlled features betraying the longing and terror warring in his chest, because he wants nothing more than to claim them both as his family, to give Mila the father she deserves and Elena the partner she needs, but he's terrified that his dark world will contaminate their innocence, that loving them will put them in danger from the enemies who would use them as weapons against him. Would you like that, little star? Dmitri finally asks, his voice rough with barely contained emotion, and when Mila nods with the certainty that only children possess, announcing that she's already been telling her friends at school about her Papa Dmitri, who brings her presents and makes Mama smile again, both adults feel their carefully constructed walls crumble completely, leaving them vulnerable and exposed in ways they're both terrifying and liberating. That night, after Mila has fallen asleep clutching the new teddy bear Dmitri bought her, a massive thing that costs more than most people's cars, but which she treasures because it came from him, Elena and Dmitri lie tangled together in his bed, their bodies still humming from lovemaking that felt different somehow, deeper and more desperate, as if they're both trying to memorize each other before some unnamed catastrophe tears them apart. "I love you," Elena whispers into the darkness, the words escaping before she can stop them. Years of carefully guarded emotions finally breaking free, and when Dmitri responds by kissing her with devastating tenderness, pouring his own confession into the press of his lips against hers, she knows they've crossed into territory from which there can be no retreat, that whatever happens next, they belong to each other in ways that go beyond desire or convenience or even survival. Dmitri's arms tighten around her as if he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will, and as Moscow's lights twinkle beyond their windows like earthbound stars, he makes silent promises he's not sure he can keep, to protect her, to love her, to be worthy of the trust she's placing in his scarred hands, even as the rational part of his mind whispers warnings about the dangers of letting anyone get this close, of having something precious enough to lose in a world that shows no mercy to the weak or the loving. Chapter 5, Love's Declaration. The pristine snow stretches endlessly beyond the windows of Dmitri's countryside estate, a winter wonderland that wraps around the sprawling dacha like a protective blanket, isolating them from Moscow's chaos and creating a sanctuary where time seems suspended between snowflakes and whispered confessions, where Elena can finally breathe without the weight of judgment or fear. Watching Mila build snow angels in the courtyard while Dmitri stands beside her within. Expression of such profound contentment that it steals her breath and makes her heart ache with the impossible beauty of this moment they've carved from a world determined to tear them apart. The estate itself feels like something from a fairy tale, with its carved wooden beams and massive stone fireplaces that cast dancing shadows across Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes. Yet Dmitri moves through these opulent rooms with the ease of a man finally at peace, his usual armor of expensive suits replaced by casual sweaters that make him look younger, more vulnerable, more human than the ruthless businessman who commands Moscow's respect and fear in equal measure. Elena discovers she's falling in love not just with the man who worships her body with reverent passion, but with this gentler version of Dmitri who teaches Mila to make snow forts and hot chocolate, who reads Russian poetry by the firelight with voices for all the characters, who looks at her across the dinner table with such naked adoration that she has to look away before the intensity burns her alive from the inside out. The first night at the estate, when Moscow's glittering lights are nothing but a distant memory, and the only sounds are crackling logs and Mila's peaceful breathing from the adjoining room, Dmitri and Elena finally strip away the last pretenses between them, their lovemaking transforming from desperate stolen moments into something sacred and eternal, every touch a promise, every kiss a vow, every whispered endearment a declaration of the future they're brave enough to imagine together despite the odds stacked against them. "I love you," Dmitri breathes against the curve of her neck as they move together in perfect rhythm, his voice breaking with the weight of emotions he's never dared voice to another soul. "I love you more than power, more than money, more than the empire I've spent my life building, and I want to spend every remaining day proving that you and Mila are worth more to me than everything else combined." And Elena responds by pulling his face to hers, kissing him with tears streaming down her cheeks. Because she's never imagined love could feel like this, consuming and gentle, passionate and safe, overwhelming and perfectly right all at once. The morning brings fresh snow and Mila's delighted squeals as she discovers Dmitri has arranged for a horse-drawn sleigh ride through the forest, and Elena watches from his estate's grand windows as the man she loves teaches her daughter to hold the reins, his large hands covering Mila's small ones with infinite patience, his face transformed by joy as the little girl calls him Papa Dima for the first time, the innocent endearment hitting him with such force that Elena sees him actually stumble, his composure cracking to reveal the depth of his longing to be worthy of that title. That evening, as they sit before the roaring fireplace with Mila curled between them like a contented kitten, Dmitri produces a small velvet box that makes Elena's heart stop completely. But instead of the engagement ring she both hopes for and fears, he reveals a delicate necklace with a star-shaped pendant that catches the firelight like captured starshine. And when he fastens it around her throat with trembling fingers, he whispers that stars are for wishes and dreams, and she is both his greatest wish and his most impossible dream come true. Elena allows herself to imagine their future, a real wedding in this state's chapel, Mila as flower girl scattering rose petals down the aisle, Sunday mornings like this one stretched into forever, growing old together in this sanctuary they've created from love and hope and the fierce determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. And for the first time since her husband's death, she believes in happy endings again, believes that love can conquer the practical concerns about money and class and the dangerous world Dmitri inhabits. But their perfect bubble begins to crack when Dmitri's phone rings incessantly throughout their second day, each call dragging him away for hushed conversations conducted in Russian too rapid and complex for Elena to follow, his face darkening with each exchange until the gentle man who built snowmen with Mila disappears behind the mask of the ruthless businessman who destroys obstacles without mercy or hesitation. Elena catches fragments of conversations, names she doesn't recognize spoken with venom, references to loose ends and permanent solutions that make her blood run cold, mentions of surveillance and protection details that suggest their romantic retreat is less escape than fortress. And when she finally confronts him about the calls, demanding to know what shadows are chasing them even here, Dmitri's eyes go flat and dangerous in a way that reminds her exactly why Moscow's underworld fears him. "There are things about my world you don't understand," he says, his voice carefully controlled but edged with steel. "Things I'm handling so you and Mila never have to worry about them, and the less you know, the safer you'll be." But Elena hears the lie beneath his protective intentions, recognizes that ignorance won't shield them from whatever storm is brewing beyond their snow-covered paradise. And suddenly the estate feels less like sanctuary and more like a beautiful cage designed to keep her compliant while he makes decisions that will affect all their lives. The final morning of their retreat dawns gray and ominous, the endless snow now feeling oppressive rather than magical, and Elena watches Dmitri pace the estate's library with predatory tension, his phone pressed to his ear as he speaks in clipped sentences that sound like battle plans, his free hand clenched into a fist that she knows could kill a man without effort, and she realizes with growing horror that the fairy tale is ending, that they're about to return to Moscow where whatever forces have been hunting them will finally catch up, where their love will be tested by realities far more dangerous than class differences or social disapproval. When Mila runs to Papa Dima for goodbye hugs before they leave for the city, Elena sees the way his face crumples with grief and terror, as if he's memorizing her daughter's laugh, because he knows it might be the last time he hears it, and the knowledge that their happiness was always temporary, always borrowed against a debt that's coming due, settles in her chest like ice, freezing the dreams she'd allowed herself to nurture during their brief, perfect escape from the world that wants to destroy them. Chapter 6. Shadows of the past. The encrypted files glow on Dmitri's computer screen, like digital confessions written in blood and betrayal. Each document Elena discovers while organizing his home office, revealing another layer of the darkness that built the empire she's been living within, oblivious to the suffering that paid for every marble surface and crystal chandelier, every designer dress he's draped across her shoulders, and every luxury he's showered upon Mila with hands that have signed death warrants disguised as business contracts. Her breath catches in her throat as she scrolls through transaction records that read like a catalog of human misery, protection rackets bleeding small businesses dry, money laundering operations that fund human trafficking rings, real estate deals where families were violently evicted to make way for Dmitri's developments, and recent communications with Viktor Petrov about territorial disputes that mention casualties like chess pieces sacrificed for strategic advantage. Each revelation hitting her like physical blows that leave her gasping and nauseous in the leather chair where she spent so many peaceful evenings reading poetry while Dmitri worked beside her. His presence then a comfort, but now a source of terror as she realizes how completely she's been deceived. The apartment that felt like sanctuary now feels like a mausoleum built from other people's bones, every beautiful object tainted by the knowledge of how it was purchased. And Elena's hands shake as she prints the most damning documents, evidence of crimes committed not in some distant past, but within the last 6 months, proving that Dimitri's claims about leaving his criminal life behind are nothing but lies designed to seduce her into complicity while he continues operating the same blood-soaked machine that made him Moscow's most feared kingpin. When Dmitri returns from his business dinner to find Elena waiting in his study with the printed files scattered across his mahogany desk like accusations given form, his face transforms from loving relief at seeing her to stark horror as he realizes his carefully constructed world of deception has finally collapsed. And the man who faces armies of rivals without flinching actually steps backward when confronted with the evidence of his crimes reflected in the eyes of the woman he loves more than his own life. "Elena, let me explain," he begins, his voice rough with desperation as he approaches her like she's a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement, but she holds up one trembling hand to stop him, her green eyes blazing with betrayal and rage that cuts through his soul like molten steel, because she trusted him with everything, her body, her heart, her daughter's safety. And he repaid that trust with lies wrapped in promises and passion designed to blind her to the monster sharing her bed. The words pour out of Dmitri in a torrent of justification and pleading, explanations about family obligations inherited from his father's empire, about the impossibility of escaping the underworld once you're born into it, about his desperate attempts to transition into legitimate business while managing the violent expectations of men who would kill him and everyone he loves if he tried to simply walk away. But Elena hears the hollow ring of rehearsed excuses beneath his panic, recognizes the practiced manipulation of a man accustomed to talking his way out of consequences through charm and calculated vulnerability. "These transactions are from last month," she says, her voice deadly quiet as she holds up a document detailing a protection racket that destroyed a family bakery she used to take Mila to for special treats. "While you were whispering promises of love against my skin, you were bleeding innocent people dry. And when I was falling asleep in your arms believing I'd found my salvation, you were planning operations that would ruin families just like mine used to be." And the way her voice breaks on, the last words destroys something fundamental in Dimitri's chest, because he sees himself through her eyes now and recognizes the monster he's always been, dressed up in expensive suits and justified by sob stories about surviving in a brutal world. Elena's mind reels as she processes the implications of what she's discovered, understanding that every gift he gave Mila, every luxury that made their lives easier, every moment of security she allowed herself to enjoy was purchased with blood money, that the fairy tale existence she'd begun to believe in was built on a foundation of other people's nightmares, and suddenly she feels complicit in every crime, dirty by association, as if the stain of his sins has seeped into her skin through every kiss and caress. "I love you," Dmitri says, the words torn from his throat like a dying prayer. "Everything I told you about wanting to change, about you and Mila making me want to be better, that's all true. You have to believe me. I've been working to extract myself from this life ever since I realized what you mean to me." But Elena shakes her head with bitter laughter because she recognizes the seduction in his voice, the same hypnotic quality that made her believe his earlier lies, and she knows that loving her hasn't transformed him into the man she thought she knew. It's simply given him new motivation to perfect his deceptions. The realization that she's been living a lie cuts deeper than any physical wound as Elena remembers every tender moment, every whispered endearment, every time she marveled at his gentleness with Mila, understanding now that she fell in love with a carefully constructed illusion while the real Dmitri Kozlov continued operating his criminal empire from shadows, using her love as both shield and camouflage for activities that would horrify her if she knew the full extent of his sins. "Mila calls you Papa," Elena whispers, her voice breaking as she thinks of her innocent daughter sleeping peacefully in the guest room while a killer moves through their lives with paternal tenderness. "She trusts you completely, and all this time you've been putting her in danger just by letting us be near you, because your enemies will use us against you, and your allies will see us as liabilities to be eliminated." And the way Dmitri flinches at her words confirms her worst fears about the precarious position their love has created. The weight of impossible choices crashes down on Elena as she realizes that loving Dmitri doesn't just make her complicit in his crimes. It makes her and Mila permanent targets in a world where violence is currency and mercy is weakness, where their connection to him paints bullseyes on their backs that will never fade as long as he remains the king of Moscow's underworld. And no amount of love can erase the fundamental truth that staying with him means condemning Mila to a life shadowed by constant danger and moral compromise. I have to protect my daughter, Elena says finally, the words falling like stones into the silence between them, and she sees Dmitri's face crumble with the realization that he's lost them both, that his sins have finally claimed the only innocent happiness he's ever known. But she also sees calculation flickering behind his grief, the predatory intelligence that made him a survivor in the world that created him. And she knows that even now, even broken by love and loss, he's already planning how to keep them in his orbit whether they want to stay or not. Chapter 7. The breaking point. Viktor Petrov emerges from the shadows of the parking garage like a predator who has been stalking his prey for weeks, his expensive cologne unable to mask the stench of corruption that clings to him like smoke, and Elena's blood turns to ice as she recognizes the man from encrypted files, Dmitri's former partner, whose face appears in dozens of crime scene photos, whose name is whispered in the same breath as disappearances and unmarked graves scattered throughout the Moscow countryside. Such a beautiful woman, Viktor purrs, his accent thick with menace as he blocks her path to the car where Mila waits innocently playing with her tablet, completely unaware that death has just introduced itself to their lives with a smile that never reaches those cold, calculating eyes. It would be such a tragedy if something happened to disturb this perfect little family Dmitri has built for himself. This weakness he's allowed to grow in his heart like a cancer that will ultimately destroy him. Elena's maternal instincts scream at her to run, to grab Mila, and flee as far from Moscow as their meager savings will carry them. But Viktor's men have already positioned themselves around the parking garage with the professional efficiency of predators who have done this dance countless times before, their presence a silent reminder that escape is an illusion for those foolish enough to believe they can walk away from the underworld unscathed once they've become valuable assets in someone else's game. The proposition Viktor lays out with business-like precision cuts through Elena's soul like a blade dipped in poison. Help him destroy Dmitri's legitimate business empire from the inside by providing access codes and financial information. Or watch as her relationship with Moscow's most feared kingpin becomes public knowledge that will paint her as either an accomplice deserving of prison or a liability requiring permanent elimination, either outcome spelling doom for the innocent child who depends on her mother's choices for survival. You see, my dear Elena, Viktor explains with the patient tone of a professor lecturing a particularly slow student, Dmitri's attempt to go legitimate has made him soft, sentimental, vulnerable in ways that his old partners find both disappointing and profitable, because a man who builds empires on fear and violence cannot simply decide to become respectable without paying the price for his past sins. And that price includes everyone foolish enough to love him, and the way his dead eyes fix on Mila through the car window makes Elena's vision blur with terror-induced rage that she forces herself to suppress because showing fear will only feed this monster's appetite for psychological torture. The days that follow Viktor's threat transform Elena's world into a waking nightmare where every shadow might hide an enemy, every stranger could be surveillance, every moment of normalcy feels borrowed against a debt that's rapidly coming due, and she finds herself memorizing Mila's laugh with desperate intensity because she knows their time together in anything resembling safety is running out like sand through broken fingers. The breaking point arrives on a Tuesday afternoon when Elena receives a call from Mila's school principal, her voice tight with barely controlled panic as she explains that strange men approached the playground during recess, asking questions about which child belonged to Elena Volkov. And only the vigilance of a security guard prevented what could have been an abduction that would have destroyed Elena's sanity and given Viktor the ultimate leverage to control both her and Dmitri's actions. Elena's hands shake uncontrollably as she races through Moscow traffic to reach the school, her mind cycling through every horrible scenario that could have unfolded if those men had succeeded in their mission. And when she finally holds Mila's small, warm body against her chest, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's strawberry shampoo and feeling the steady beat of her innocent heart, she knows with crystalline clarity that her love for Dmitri, no matter how deep, no matter how transformative, no matter how desperately she wishes things could be different, cannot be allowed to cost her daughter's life or freedom. The confrontation with Dmitri takes place in his penthouse that evening, the same space where they've made love with desperate passion and whispered dreams of forever. But now the familiar luxury feels like a mausoleum decorated with the remnants of their shattered fairy tale. And Elena stands before the floor-to-ceiling windows where Moscow's lights twinkle like fallen stars while she gathers the courage to destroy both their hearts in service of a greater love, her responsibility to protect. The child who trusted her to make the right choices even when they feel like dying. They went after Mila, Elena says, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face like liquid grief, and she watches Dimitri's expression transform from confusion to horror to a rage so pure and deadly that she glimpses the monster who built his empire on other people's bones, the killer who would burn the world to ash to protect what belongs to him. But she also sees the man who loves her daughter, like his own flesh and blood, whose face crumbles with guilt and self-hatred as he realizes his sins have finally reached out to claim an innocent. "I'll kill them all," Dimitri promises, his voice dropping to that silky whisper that has sentenced men to death, his hands clenching into fists that could crush windpipes without effort. "Victor, his men, everyone who dared to threaten our family. I'll paint Moscow red with their blood before I let anyone hurt either of you." But Elena shakes her head with bitter understanding because she knows that violence will only breed more violence. That killing Victor will simply make room for the next ambitious predator to rise from the underworld's endless supply of monsters hungry for power and revenge. "That's exactly why I have to leave," Elena whispers, each word feeling like swallowing glass, because she's condemning them both to a lifetime of longing for what they cannot have, because your solution to every problem is death and destruction, because loving you means Mila will never be safe from the enemies your past creates, because I can't build my daughter's future on a foundation of blood money and violence. No matter how much I love the man you could have been if circumstances had been different." The silence that follows her declaration stretches between them like an ocean of regret and impossible choices, and Elena watches the most powerful man in Moscow break apart before her eyes, his face cycling through disbelief and desperate bargaining and finally, devastating acceptance as he realizes that losing her is the price he must pay for the sins that made him rich and feared and ultimately hollow. "I love you," Dimitri says, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of everything they're both sacrificing. "I will love you until the day I die, and I will spend every remaining breath making sure you and Mila are protected even if I can never hold you again." But Elena forces herself to turn away from the naked agony in his eyes because staying strong enough to walk away requires her to stop looking at the ruins of their shared dreams. As Elena packs their few belongings in the guest room where Mila sleeps fitfully, unaware that her world is about to change forever, she allows herself one last look at the man who showed her what love could feel like when it's pure and desperate and doomed, memorizing the way moonlight falls across his broken features as he stands at the window like a statue carved from grief and regret. And then she takes her daughter's hand and walks away from paradise, choosing survival over happiness. Because that's what mothers do when the world demands impossible sacrifices from those who dare to love too deeply. Chapter 8. Descent into darkness. The cramped two-room apartment feels like a prison after the luxury of Dimitri's penthouse, with its peeling wallpaper and drafty windows that let in Moscow's bitter winter wind along with the constant noise from neighbors who argue through paper-thin walls. But Elena forces herself to be grateful for this sanctuary that Viktor Petrov's men will never think to search. This anonymous slice of working-class Moscow where she and Mila can disappear into the gray. Masses of people struggling to survive, while her heart bleeds with every breath she takes without the man who showed her what love could feel like when it consumed every fiber of your being. The return to her old life cuts deeper than any physical wound as Elena takes on 3 jobs again. Cleaning office buildings before dawn, serving coffee to businessmen who remind her painfully of Dimitri, stocking shelves at the grocery store until her feet scream in protest, each menial task a reminder of the fairy tale existence she voluntarily abandoned. Each kopeck earned through exhausted labor a bitter contrast to the effortless abundance she once knew, and yet she forces herself to find meaning in this struggle because it represents the only path toward keeping Mila safe from the violence that follows Dimitri like shadows at midnight. Mila's nightly tears shatter what remains of Elena's composure as her 6-year-old daughter sobs into her pillow, asking endless questions about why they had to leave Papa Dima behind, why they can't live in the beautiful house anymore, why Elena cries when she thinks Mila isn't looking, and Elena has no answers that won't destroy her daughter's innocence. No explanations that could make sense of how love can be both the most beautiful and most dangerous force in the universe, capable of lifting souls to heaven and dragging them straight into hell depending on the circumstances that surround it. Meanwhile, across the city in his glass tower that now feels like a mausoleum decorated with memories of laughter and love, Dmitri transforms into something darker and more lethal than he's ever been, channeling his grief into a systematic campaign of destruction that makes his enemies whisper prayers and cross themselves when his name is mentioned. Because a man who has lost everything he values becomes infinitely more dangerous than one who still has something to protect, and Viktor Petrov's organization begins disappearing piece by piece like a house being demolished by a patient, methodical force of nature. Dmitri's days blur into a continuous cycle of violence and strategy as he uses every connection, every favor owed, every secret weapon in his arsenal to dismantle Viktor's empire while simultaneously working to extricate himself from the criminal underworld that created him, selling off illegal operations to rivals, transferring dirty money into legitimate investments. Burning bridges he spent decades building in service of a dream that Elena will never see fulfilled, the dream of becoming worthy of her love, of building a clean empire that could shelter her and Mila without staining their souls with blood money. The surveillance footage on his private monitors shows Elena walking to work in the pre-dawn darkness, her shoulders bent with exhaustion but her spine still straight with the dignity that first captivated him. And Dmitri studies these images with the devotion of a man worshipping at a shrine, memorizing the way she moves, the determined set of her jaw, the careful way she counts kopecks at the grocery store. And he knows he's violating her trust by watching over them, but he cannot stop himself. Because ensuring their safety has become his only remaining purpose in a world that lost all meaning the moment she walked out of his life. The anonymous envelopes begin appearing in Elena's mailbox on the 15th of every month, thick with bills that represent more money than she could earn in 6 months of backbreaking labor. And at first she throws them away in a fury of wounded pride, refusing to accept charity from the man whose world nearly destroyed everything she holds dear. But when Mila develops a persistent cough that requires expensive medicine, and Elena realizes she cannot afford both the prescription and the rent, she retrieves the crumpled envelope from the trash with tears streaming down her face, hating herself for needing his help, hating him for making it impossible to refuse. Elena's discovery that Dmitri is somehow still caring for them from the shadows reopens wounds that were just beginning to scab over, because each envelope represents not just financial security, but proof that he's still out there somewhere, still thinking of them, still loving them with a devotion that makes her choice to leave feel both absolutely necessary and utterly devastating. And she finds herself torn between gratitude that saves Mila from the worst of their poverty and renewed agony that comes from knowing the man she loves is close enough to touch, but separated from her by an ocean of impossible circumstances. The nights become Elena's enemy as she lies awake in the narrow bed she shares with Mila, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing while her own heart pounds with memories of Dmitri's touch, the way his hands worshipped her body like she was something sacred, the reverent way he whispered her name in the darkness. The promises he made against her skin that felt eternal in the moment but crumbled like sand when reality intruded with its demands for impossible choices between love and survival. Dmitri's own nights pass in a haze of expensive vodka and dangerous meetings as he systematically eliminates threats to Elena's safety while slowly dismantling the criminal empire that made him rich but cost him everything that mattered. And sometimes he stands at his penthouse windows staring out at the city that contains the woman he loves but can never hold again. His reflection in the glass showing a man who has aged decades in the months since she left, his eyes hollow with the kind of loss that changes the fundamental structure of a soul. When Elena finally sees Dmitri from across a crowded street 3 months after their separation, her heart stops completely as she drinks in the sight of him, thinner than before, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame, his face carved with lines of exhaustion and grief that make him look older, more vulnerable, completely destroyed by their separation. And for one desperate moment their eyes meet across the flow of pedestrians and traffic, time stopping as they stare at each other, with naked longing and regret, before Elena forces herself to turn away, knowing that even a moment's weakness could unravel all her careful work to build a life without him. The weight of their separation crushes them both with equal force as they exist in parallel universes of longing and regret, Elena finding meaning in her struggle to provide for Mila, while her heart remains forever fractured, Dmitri using his remaining power to protect them from a distance while systematically destroying the world that made him powerful but ultimately hollow. both of them haunted by dreams of what could have been if love alone were enough to conquer the darkness that some pasts create if wanting something desperately could make it possible. If the fairy tales Elena once read to Mila contained any truth about love conquering all obstacles that stand in its path. Chapter 9. Blood and Redemption. The narrow alley behind Elena's apartment building becomes a trap when Viktor Petrov emerges from shadows with two of his men flanking him like wolves hunting wounded prey, their presence transforming the familiar path home into a nightmare corridor where escape is impossible and survival depends on choices that will either save or damn everyone she loves. And Elena's blood turns to ice as she realizes that her months of careful anonymity have been nothing but an illusion, that Victor has been watching, waiting, planning this moment when she would be most vulnerable and desperate. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? Victor purrs, his expensive cologne unable to mask the stench of violence that clings to him like smoke from funeral pyres, his dead eyes reflecting the cold calculation of a predator who has cornered his prey and is savoring the moment before the kill. 3 months I've watched you scrub floors and count kopecks like some common peasant, waiting for the perfect opportunity to remind you that nobody walks away from Dmitry Kozlov's world without paying the price in blood, and the casual way he mentions knowing Mila's school schedule, her walking route, the grocery store where they shop, sends terror through Elena's veins because she realizes that every precaution she's taken has been worthless against an enemy with unlimited resources and infinite patience. The ultimatum Victor presents cuts through Elena's soul like a blade dipped in poison as he explains with businesslike precision that she has 48 hours to arrange a meeting with Dmitry in a location of Victor's choosing, a warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow where his men will be waiting to eliminate the last obstacle to his complete control of the city's underworld. And if she refuses or tries to warn Dmitry about the trap, both she and Mila will simply disappear one night there. Bodies never found, their deaths serving as a cautionary tale about the price of defying Victor's will. Elena's hands shake as she dials Dmitry's private number for the first time in 3 months, her heart hammering against her ribs as she hears his voice, rough with surprise and desperate hope. Answer on the first ring, and despite the mortal danger surrounding them both, she feels a traitorous warmth bloom in her chest at the sound of her name on his lips, spoken like a prayer and a confession all at once, proving that time and distance have done nothing to diminish the connection that binds them together, like gravity binding planets to their star. The plan they devise over encrypted phone calls feels like madness disguised as strategy, a dangerous dance where one misstep will result in death for all of them. But Elena sees the brilliant tactical mind that made Dmitry Moscow's most feared kingpin as he coordinates with law enforcement contacts he's cultivated during his months of systematic dismantling of his own criminal empire, turning Victor's trap into a snare that will finally bring justice for years of violence and corruption that have stained the city's streets with innocent blood. The warehouse on the appointed night feels like a cathedral devoted to violence, its cavernous space filled with shadows that could hide armies of killers, and Elena walks through the loading dock doors with her heart in her throat, knowing that Dmitry is already inside somewhere, that police units are positioned around the perimeter, that everything depends on her ability to play the role of broken woman seeking revenge against the man who destroyed her life, when the truth is that seeing him again after months of separation makes her feel like she can breathe properly for the first time since she walked away from paradise. Victor's gloating confession fills the empty space with echoes as he brags about every crime, every murder, every act of terrorism he's committed in his war against Dmitry's organization, his words being recorded by devices Elena wears with shaking hands. And she forces herself to nod and agree, while inside, she's screaming at the casual way he discusses destroying lives like they're nothing more than chess pieces to be sacrificed in his game of power and control, his arrogance making him careless about witnesses and evidence that will finally put him behind bars where he belongs. The moment when Dmitry appears from the shadows feels like the world shifting on its axis as Elena drinks in the sight of him, thinner than before, his face carved with lines of grief and exhaustion, but still impossibly beautiful to her starving eyes, still moving with that lethal grace that first captivated her in a coffee shop that feels like a lifetime ago. And when their eyes meet across the warehouse floor, she sees her own desperate longing reflected in his gaze, the same love that has haunted her dreams and made every day without him feel like dying slowly. The confrontation explodes into violence with the sudden intensity of a lightning strike as Victor realizes he's been betrayed, his men drawing weapons while police sirens wail in the distance, and Elena finds herself caught in the crossfire of a war that started before she was born, bullets ricocheting off concrete walls while Dmitri moves through the chaos with deadly precision, protecting her even as he systematically eliminates threats with the cold efficiency of a machine built for destruction. Is every action proving that love has transformed him from a man who kills for profit into one who kills to protect what matters most. The world stops completely when Victor's final, desperate shot rings out and Dmitri throws himself between the bullet and Elena's heart, his body jerking with the impact before he collapses in her arms, blood spreading across his white shirt like crimson flowers blooming against snow, and Elena's screams of anguish echo through the warehouse as she presses her hands against the wound, trying to hold his life inside his body through sheer force of will while whispering desperate confessions of love she thought she'd buried forever. "I love you," Elena sobs against his ear as his blood soaks through her clothes, her tears falling like rain on his pale face. "I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. I was just so scared, so terrified of losing Mila. But I can't lose you either. Please don't leave me. Please don't die because I was too proud to fight for us." And Dimitri's eyes flutter open long enough to whisper that loving her was worth every bullet, every sacrifice, every drop of blood he spilled in service of becoming worthy of her heart. The hospital waiting room becomes Elena's purgatory as she sits beside Mila, who clutches the teddy bear Dmitri bought her months ago and asks with devastating innocence, "Is Papa Dima going to be okay, Mama?" And Elena realizes that her daughter's simple question contains all the truth she's been running from. That Dmitri is family. That love doesn't disappear just because circumstances make it inconvenient or dangerous. That running away from happiness to protect it is the most futile kind of cowardice. And that redemption isn't something earned through suffering, but something granted through the courage to choose love despite the costs. As dawn breaks over Moscow, and the doctors finally emerge with cautious optimism about Dmitri's chances for survival, Elena makes the decision that should have been obvious from the moment she first looked into his storm-gray eyes. That love worth dying for is also love worth living for, worth fighting for, worth rebuilding a life around even when the world seems determined to tear it apart. And that sometimes the greatest act of protection is not running away, but standing firm and declaring that some bonds are too sacred to be broken by fear. Chapter 10. Love conquers. All 3 months of rehabilitation have transformed Dmitri from Moscow's most feared kingpin into something Elena barely recognizes, a man reborn through pain and sacrifice, his powerful frame still bearing the scars of the bullet that nearly claimed his life, but his eyes holding a peace she's never seen before. The desperate edge of violence replaced by quiet determination as he moves through his penthouse with careful grace, every step a reminder of how close they came to losing everything, how precious each moment together truly is when measured against the alternative of eternal separation. Elena stands in the private elevator with Mila's small hand clasped in hers, her heart hammering against her ribs as the floors tick by toward a confrontation that will either reunite their fractured family or destroy the last remnants of hope she's been nurturing like a fragile flame through the long months of his recovery. And when the doors slide open to reveal the man she's loved through every impossible circumstance, she sees her own desperate longing reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Same hunger that has haunted her dreams and made every day without him feel like drowning slowly in an ocean of regret. The penthouse looks different somehow, stripped of the cold corporate efficiency that once defined it, transformed into something warmer and more human, with children's books scattered on coffee tables and artwork hanging on walls that speak of hope rather than conquest. And Elena realizes that Dmitri has been preparing for this moment, rebuilding not just his life, but his entire world around the possibility that she might come back, that love might prove stronger than the fear that drove them apart in what feels like another lifetime, but was only a handful of heartbeats in the grand scheme of eternity. Elena! Dmitri whispers her name like a prayer answered after months of desperate pleading with a universe that seemed determined to keep them apart. And when Mila breaks free from her mother's protective grip to run straight into his arms, calling Papa Dima with the pure joy of a child who has never understood why adults make love so complicated, Elena watches him kneel carefully to embrace her daughter with infinite tenderness, his face crumbling with emotions too vast for words as he breathes in the strawberry scent of Mila's hair and feels her small arms wrap around his neck with complete trust and forgiveness. The documents scattered across Dimitri's dining table tell the story of his transformation more eloquently than any speech could manage. Testimony given to federal prosecutors, asset transfers that liquidate his criminal empire, cooperation agreements that will help convict dozens of his former associates, and adoption papers bearing Mila's name that he's filled out with meticulous care. Every signature a declaration that he's choosing love over power, family over fear, redemption over the comfortable darkness that once defined his existence in a world where violence was currency and mercy was weakness. "I've been cleaning house," Dimitri says with bitter humor, his voice rough with exhaustion as he explains how the bullet that nearly killed him also killed the man he used to be, how lying in that hospital bed with Elena's tears still wet on his cheeks made him realize that all the money and power in the world meant nothing if he couldn't protect the people who made life worth living. Victor's organization is dismantled, my own criminal ties severed, and every enemy neutralized through legal means rather than the old ways, because I want to build something clean for us, something worthy of the family we could become if you're brave enough to trust me one more time." Elena's voice breaks as she tells him about the revelation that came to her during those terrifying hours when she thought she might lose him forever, how she realized that love isn't about avoiding risk, but about choosing which risks are worth taking, that protecting Mila doesn't mean running from happiness, but fighting to build the kind of life where happiness can flourish safely. "I was so afraid of your world destroying us that I nearly destroyed us myself," she confesses, tears streaming down her face as she moves closer to the man who represents both her greatest joy and her deepest terror. "But I've learned that love without courage is just another kind of cowardice, that building a family means accepting that some battles are worth fighting no matter how dangerous they might be." The kiss they share tastes of salt tears and desperate hope, 3 months of separation and longing condensing into a single moment of connection that rewrites the fundamental laws of their universe. And Elena feels herself melting against his chest as his arms encircle her with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious. His lips moving against hers with a hunger that speaks of nights spent dreaming of this reunion, of days spent planning for a future he wasn't sure he deserved but was determined to earn through blood and sacrifice and the slow, patient work of becoming worthy. Mila's giggles break through their passionate reunion as she tugs on Dimitri's sleeve, demanding attention with the imperious authority of a 6-year-old who has been separated from her beloved Papa Dima for far too long, and Elena watches with overflowing heart as the man she loves lifts their daughter, because Mila is their daughter now, has always been their daughter in every way that matters, into his arms, spinning her around the penthouse while she squeals with delight, and suddenly, the cold corporate space transforms into something magical, filled with the kind of joy that makes empires and bank accounts and social status seem like meaningless abstractions compared to the wealth of having a family to love and protect. The evening that follows feels like a rebirth as they move through the familiar rhythms of family life. Dinner around the table, where Mila chatters about school and friends while Dimitri listens with rapt attention. Story time on the sofa, where Elena's voice weaves tales of princes and princesses while Dimitri's fingers trace patterns on her skin. Bedtime rituals that transform the penthouse into a home where love lives in every corner, and safety means more than security systems and bodyguards. It means the unshakable knowledge that they belong to each other in ways that transcend law and custom, and the opinions of a world that will never understand what they've built from the ashes of their separate tragedies. Later, as Moscow's lights twinkle beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like earthbound stars bearing witness to their reunion, Dimitri leads Elena onto the private terrace where he first kissed her with desperate hunger, where their love story began in earnest despite all the obstacles that seemed insurmountable at the time, and when he drops to one knee with a ring that catches the moonlight like captured fire. Elena realizes that fairy tales don't always end with the prince rescuing the princess. Sometimes they end with two broken people choosing to heal together, building something beautiful from the ruins of everything they've lost and found and nearly lost again. "Marry me," Dimitri whispers, his voice thick with emotion as he offers her not just his heart, but his name, his future, his promise to love and protect both her and Mila for all the days of their lives. "Marry me and let me spend forever proving that love really can conquer all, that family built on sacrifice and forgiveness is stronger than any empire built on fear and violence, that the best revenge against a world that tried to destroy us is to live so completely, so joyfully that our happiness becomes its own form of victory against the darkness." Elena's yes, echoes across the Moscow night like a battle cry disguised as a wedding vow. And as Dmitri slides the ring onto her finger, while Mila sleeps peacefully inside, dreaming of the family that will wake up whole and complete for the first time in their lives, they both know that this is only the beginning of their story, that love this deep and hard one will face new challenges and obstacles. But they also know that together they can survive anything, because they've already survived everything and emerge stronger, more beautiful, more unbreakably bound than ever before.